It is the middle of the 13th century along the western coast of Bergen, and winter has settled in with a kind of permanence that modern life rarely understands. Snow does not fall gently. It accumulates, layer after layer, pressing against timber walls and sealing entire communities into isolation. Temperatures plunge so low that exposed skin fails in minutes. Inside a modest wooden dwelling, there is no margin for error. Heat does not come from a switch or a thermostat. It comes from fire, and fire depends entirely on wood. In that world, firewood was not just fuel. It was the dividing line between survival and collapse. Families lived or died based on whether their wood burned cleanly, steadily, and efficiently. A poorly prepared stack could mean smoke choking the room, heat wasted into the air, and a slow descent into cold, illness, and eventual death. Every log mattered. Every flame carried consequences. What is striking is that, despite our modern tools, many people today struggle with the same fundamental problem. Wood hisses instead of burns, chimneys clog, fires fail to deliver the warmth they promise. The issue is not a lack of technology. It is a loss of understanding. Medieval communities developed a precise, almost instinctive grasp of how wood, air, and heat interact. They built systems that worked with nature rather than against it. And those systems kept entire populations alive through winters, far harsher than most of us will ever experience. This is not nostalgia. It is a rediscovery of practical knowledge, because the same principles that sustained medieval households can still transform how we manage energy today. The difference is that they demand attention, patience, and a willingness to learn what earlier generations never forgot. Step into a modern backyard and the contrast becomes obvious. Firewood is cut, stacked, and covered, often with the assumption that time alone will solve everything. Months pass, winter arrives. The logs are brought inside, and instead of a strong, clean flame, the fire struggles. Moisture trapped inside the wood resists combustion. Energy that should heat a room is wasted converting water into steam. The underlying issue is simple, but often overlooked. Wood continues to interact with its environment long after it has been cut. It absorbs moisture from the air, from the ground, and from daily temperature fluctuations. Even when protected from direct rain, it can remain damp for far longer than expected. Modern measurements consistently show that improperly stored firewood retains significant moisture levels even after extended periods. This has direct consequences. Wet wood burns inefficiently, producing less heat while generating more smoke. That smoke carries unburned particles that settle inside chimneys, forming a dangerous residue known as creosote. Over time, this buildup creates a serious fire hazard. A single spark can ignite it, turning a heating system into a destructive force. For medieval households, this was not an abstract risk. Chimney fires could destroy entire homes in minutes. There was no emergency response, no insurance, no second chance. As a result, they approached firewood with a level of discipline that modern practices often lack. They did not accept damp fuel. They engineered their environments to prevent it. Archaeological and historical evidence across regions such as Germany and Scandinavia reveals a consistent pattern. Firewood was rarely stored in isolated structures. Instead, it was placed directly alongside living spaces, integrated into the architecture itself. This approach offered a subtle but powerful benefit. Even the simplest homes released small amounts of heat through their walls. This escaping warmth created a narrow zone where temperatures remained slightly higher than the surrounding environment. That difference, though minimal, was enough to reduce condensation and encourage moisture to evaporate from stored wood. At the same time, these stacks were positioned to take advantage of natural airflow. They were not sealed off or tightly enclosed. Air was allowed to move freely between the logs, carrying moisture away. The result was a steady, passive drying process driven entirely by environmental conditions. Modern experiments replicating these setups have confirmed their effectiveness. Wood stored against a structure with proper airflow dries significantly faster than wood kept in enclosed or poorly ventilated spaces. The principle is straightforward. Drying is not about blocking moisture entirely. It is about allowing it to escape continuously. When larger quantities of firewood were required, medieval communities turned to a design that combined stability with efficiency. This structure, often referred to as a Holzhausen, took the form of a cylindrical stack arranged with careful attention to airflow and balance. The circular shape served multiple purposes. Structurally, it prevented collapse as the wood settled and shrank during the drying process. Instead of pushing outward, the logs reinforced each other inward, creating a stable formation that could last for extended periods. More importantly, the design enhanced air circulation. The outer layer absorbed heat from sunlight, warming the air within the structure. As that air rose, it created a natural upward movement that drew cooler, drier air in from below. This continuous movement acted as a passive drying mechanism, removing moisture without any external intervention. The top of the structure was covered to shed rain, but the sides remained open. This balance between protection and exposure allowed the system to function effectively in a variety of weather conditions. It was not a temporary solution. It was a long-term strategy for maintaining a reliable fuel supply. The process did not begin with storage. It started in the forest. Medieval communities practiced a method known as copicing, which involved cutting trees in a way that encouraged regrowth rather than destruction. Species such as hazel, willow, and ash were particularly suited to this approach. Instead of harvesting large mature trees, they focused on younger shoots that grew quickly and uniformly. These smaller pieces of wood had a critical advantage. The reduced size allowed them to dry far more rapidly than thick logs. It required less processing and were easier to handle. This system created a sustainable cycle. Trees regenerated naturally, providing a continuous supply of fuel without depleting the landscape. It was an early form of renewable energy management, built on observation and long-term planning rather than extraction. In regions such as Moravia, entire woodlands were managed this way. The result was not just efficiency, but resilience. Communities were not dependent on unpredictable resources. They cultivated their own energy supply. Once the wood was properly prepared and burned, medieval builders took another step that modern systems often neglect. They focused on storing heat rather than constantly generating it. This concept, known as thermal mass, involved using dense materials to absorb and slowly release heat over time. In large structures like Malbert Castle, this principle was applied on a massive scale. Heated air was directed through chambers filled with stone, which absorbed the energy and released it gradually. A single fire could provide warmth for days. Even smaller homes incorporated similar ideas through masonry stoves and tiled heaters. These systems captured heat from the fire and distributed it slowly, creating a steady and comfortable environment. They were remarkably efficient compared to open fireplaces, which lose a significant portion of their heat. The key difference lies in how energy is used. Instead of trying to maintain a constant flame, these systems concentrated heat into a shorter period and stored it for later use. This reduced fuel consumption while improving overall performance. The decline of these methods did not occur because they were ineffective. It happened because they were no longer seen as necessary. After major technological shifts in the 20th century, alternative heating sources became widely available. Firewood transitioned from a primary necessity to a secondary option. As reliance on traditional methods decreased, so did the knowledge associated with them. Techniques that had been refined over generations were gradually forgotten. Storage practices became less precise. Efficiency declined. Problems that had once been avoided began to reappear. This shift also introduced new dependencies. Instead of managing fuel directly, people began to rely on external systems and services. While convenient, this approach reduced self-sufficiency. When those systems fail or become expensive, the lack of foundational knowledge becomes a serious limitation. The relevance of these historical practices is not confined to the past. They can be adapted to modern environments with minimal effort. Storing wood against a structure, ensuring proper airflow, and protecting it from direct moisture are all simple adjustments that can significantly improve drying. Constructing circular stacks in open spaces can enhance stability and airflow without requiring specialized tools. Managing wood sources with an emphasis on smaller, faster-drying pieces can reduce preparation time and increase efficiency. Even the concept of thermal mass can be incorporated into modern homes through design choices that prioritize heat retention. These are not complex innovations. They are refinements based on proven principles. The strength of these methods lies in their simplicity. They rely on natural processes rather than mechanical solutions. They require attention rather than constant input. and they offer a level of reliability that is difficult to achieve through shortcuts. The most important lesson is not about firewood itself. It is about understanding how systems work and using that understanding to create stability. Medieval communities did not have advanced technology, but they possessed something equally valuable. They observed, adapted, and refined their practices until they achieved consistency. That same approach remains available today. The difference is whether it is recognized and applied. Knowledge that has endured for centuries does not lose its value simply because it is no longer common. If this deep dive into historical survival methods sharpened your perspective and gave you something practical to apply, make sure you subscribe to Intelligent Survival and share this with someone who takes self-reliance seriously. These are not just stories from the past, they're tools for the future, and the more people who understand them, the stronger we all become.